What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Good Wolf Project. I'm your host, Jerry Scarlato, and today's conversation is with Lawrence Dunning. Lawrence is a real estate investor, author of the book, The Forgotten Asset Class, as well as a black belt in jiu-jitsu and previous MMA professional, and many other things that Lawrence has done along the way, running ultra marathons, running marathons on seven continents, many things that Lawrence has done. Outside of the phenomenal athlete that Lawrence is and the athletic feats that he's accomplished, he is also a man filled with wisdom. As you'll see during this conversation, he's made many transitions in his life, and most of them have been thought through very purposefully. He transitioned, for instance, from owning a multi-million dollar business to giving it away to working to become a professional in the MMA because he knew that his window was closing, and he thought through that process very purposely. And he said it was a very easy decision to make because he knew that at the end of his life, if he did not make that decision, that he would regret it, and he would have not lived his fullest life and lived out all of his dreams. So this is a very purposeful conversation, lots of wisdom to be had throughout this conversation. So make sure that you have a pen and paper available. But before we get to that, first, of course, I'll encourage you to hit the pause button so that you can go give us a quick review. You can give us up to a 5-star review on all of the platforms, or if you're on YouTube, you can go ahead and just, hit that subscribe button. Definitely appreciate that, because the more subscribers we have, the more people that we reach, and the more people that we reach, the more lives we change. And that is the goal, my friends, is to change lives, to help people live more consciously so that they can fulfill their fullest potential. So without further ado, enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with Lawrence Dunning. Lawrence, my friend, good to have you on the show. I was looking through your bio on your website, and as I'm looking through it, three words came to mind. And I want to say I'll throw these three words out, and I'm curious your thoughts on the words. Okay, because I'm curious if they resonate. I know they'll resonate, but I'm also curious if they came from somewhere. So risk, purpose, and mentors came to mind. Risk, purpose, and mentors. Because as I'm reading through your bio, most of what you've done, you've made some risky decisions. There were some transitions in your life where who knows what could have happened. At one point, and I quote, "I gave away my company," which was the line that you had in your bio. It seems like you did things on purpose. Of course, not always. Sometimes it just kind of, you get to a point and you're like, well, I don't know. I feel like I should just move in this direction. And then you were always surrounded by people that help lift you up. And I wonder if that was on purpose also. So what are your thoughts on those words? How do
Well,
those
Jerry,
feel
so
when you think about your life?
well, Jerry, it's so great to see you, and thanks for having me on. That's very perceptive of you for picking those. And I'd love to talk a little bit about all three because they, like you said, they do resonate with me. So I'll talk about risk real quickly. My background is in derivatives trading, and when I was 22, and they were teaching me about the principles before they even let me trade real derivatives, they said every time you do a trade, you have to know two things: what is your risk, meaning how much can you lose, and what is your reward, meaning how much you can make. And I think that's such a good matrix for living your life, because what is the risk of not following your dreams today? Well, today it's nothing because it's not going to impact you. But maybe when you're an old man and you look back at your life, it's going to be the biggest regret you ever have. Or what is the risk that if you're completely hammered at a bar and you drive home drunk, what is the risk? Well, the risk is you could kill someone or kill yourself, and the reward is you save $20 on an Uber. It doesn't seem like a good risk reward matrix. So I love that idea of looking at what is the risk, what is the reward of every big decision, always from the perspective of your future self. And I'm so glad you noticed that about the company, because that was a massive. I gave away several million dollars by giving away my trading company, as opposed to keeping it and just having people. I had a very good business model, and I could have kept it and kept getting passive income, but I was a little burnt out at the time, and I had this dream of like, where can I take professional MMA, and how far can I push myself as a source of personal growth. And I don't, of course, I lost money. I regret the fact being not being a bit more financial savvy, but I don't have any regrets, because I know when I'm an old man, I'll never regret taking that chance while I was young enough. We have a lifetime to make money, but you only have a very small athletic window to do something like professional fighting. So I think the idea of risk and reward is such a good thing. I always want to. There's a beautiful book called The Top Five Regrets. It talks about the top five regrets of dying. I forget what it's called. It might be called that, but it talked about how one of the top regrets is people wish that they had taken those shots and taken those risks when they're young, when they had the opportunity to. So I'm thinking, if that's a risk of people at the end of their life, it's something we should think about before we get to the end of their life. So I think that's a really powerful word, risk.
It definitely is. And I like how you attach, how you are purposeful again about looking at the future, right? Because I think a lot of people think in reward, but they think in reward today. And
Yes.
they don't even look at the risk part of it. Because generally when you look at reward today, you're looking at risk in the future, but you don't even perceive that part because you're too focused on the reward today. But if you flip those around and you understand that if you look at reward in the future, you may have to take some level of risk today. Now, what level of risk is totally up to you. And I would say risk is really defined by how much you know about a subject instead of
Mhm.
how risky a subject is. Now, granted, certain deals, like in real estate, for instance, of course, certain deals are riskier than other
Mhm.
deals. They may flop because they're not in a good part of town or there's more money involved, whatever the factor is. But for most people, the definition of risk really comes down to just not knowing what you know, not knowing what you don't know.
Exactly. And I love what you said about the future self, Jerry, because look, you and I are both big into fitness and working out and health. We could have a day, 2 days, maybe even a week where we didn't work out and we ate like crap. And you wouldn't, would look almost the same in the mirror. But if we kept doing that, our future self would be, out of shape and unhealthy and look terrible. So it's one of those things where the reward is not today, it's not tomorrow, it's in a lifetime of a healthy way to go through life and having the energy to do cool things. And so that's such a good, because that's an easy thing for a lot of people to be like, I'll skip the workout today because I want to spend a few hours on this project. But I'd always say there's certain non-negotiables that your future self wants you to build into the fabric of your day that is an absolute non-negotiable. And one of those is a daily workout for me.
Yeah, well, most definitely. I think we're on the same page as far as that goes because you're delaying gratification. You're recognizing that you're doing something today for the betterment of yourself tomorrow. I would argue you're also getting a lot of benefit today too. You're getting more energy. You're getting, dopamine. You got all these things going
Yes.
on today as well. But most people don't focus on that. They're more worried about the way they look in the mirror or, how much fat they're losing, whatever the thing is that they're trying to get instant gratification for. So you got to be able to switch your thoughts about that if you're going to actually make something sustainable and make something work. Because in some way, shape, or form, exercise is a risk in of itself to some degree. I mean, it's certain you know that you're going to get something out of it, but I think that's why people don't keep going is because for them in their mind it is a risk. They're not totally sure that they're going to get something out of it because they've never gone far enough to see the result, like the actual sustainable result.
Well, I'm so glad you said it. I didn't think about it. You just reminded me, but you're right. You do have the immediate effect, and it's not like you're going to look better today than you did yesterday from a really hard workout. But the mental benefit, the idea of just getting all those endorphins and feeling so good. I mean, on a chemical level, I think the endorphins you and I get from a hard workout is not that different from cocaine and these other drugs that people take to feel better. Um, and that's something that I didn't realize when I was young, but it's been the biggest gift to myself is I use jiu-jitsu as an example. I've been training jiu-jitsu for about 25 years. And the reason that I've trained has changed multiple times. And the first reason was because I was a boxer and I wanted to fight MMA one day and I didn't want to get choked out on the ground. But then later on, I was competing just purely in jiu-jitsu. I was real focused on competitive jiu-jitsu. So then my focus was trying to do well in a sporting context. But now when I go, I'm 45 years old and I have a lot of things going on in my life outside martial arts. So I go there, it's like my zen, my 90 minutes for myself. I see my teammates that have become dear friends, a lot of them, and it's a time for me, and it's a mental break from the stress of life. So I may be doing the same thing for decades, but the things that I'm getting out of it are different, and I never appreciated the mental benefit of martial arts and exercise until much more recently. So I'm so glad you mentioned that, because you're right. Most people, I mean, humans evolved to move and be active. And I'll use the example of a dog, but if you have a dog who's, like a husky, or those breeds that need a lot of exercise, and they don't get exercise, they will tear up your house. But I used to have a husky mix who passed away now, but he was an angel. He would sleep around on the furniture because he got his exercise. His physical needs were met. He was the best dog ever. But so it's the same with people. I truly believe that so many people that get it, they spend all day on Twitter arguing nonsense, or they're just like unhappy, miserable, angry people. I think a lot of that, not always, but I think a lot of it is due to them not getting their physical needs as humans met. Because we're animals, we have to get that energy out somewhere.
Yeah, most definitely. And I would argue that number one, the body is meant for movement. There's no doubt in my mind about that. I actually call human beings a Swiss Army knights of movement, because human beings they're not fast. They can't jump high. They're not the strongest. Like gorillas are significantly stronger than humans. Leopards can run significantly faster than humans. Birds can fly high. Humans can't fly at all. But nonetheless, there are things that can jump higher, run faster, and do all these things better, but there's nothing on earth that can do all of them. So human beings can do all of them, and human beings are meant to do all of them. And the fact that most people don't sprint, I think it's like after the age of 20 or 22, most people, like 90% of people, never sprint again. And probably after the age of 30, 90% of people never jump again. So that fact alone goes to show that you're just not using yourself. Now, Jerry, what does that have to do with, risk, feeling good and all that? Well, your body wants you to do these things. You don't understand. Your body wants you to jump, wants you to run, wants you to move, wants you to be on the ground and roll around on the ground. It wants you to do these things. And the connection is your brain. Your brain and your body are they are one and the same to a degree,
Mhm.
because there is a connection between creativity and how you move your body. If you go out and you go for a walk, for instance, there's a good chance that you'll come up with a creative idea, or you'll think through your problem, or you'll do something. There's a reason that happens. So that missing link that so many people throw to the side, they just want to exercise because they want to lose some fat, and you don't recognize the all of the other more profound benefits that you're missing. I
Mhm.
think people just they look too shallow into those kinds of changes and how those things can impact their life.
That's such a great point. I love what you said about walking. Sometimes ideas come to you, because that's like the old philosophers of the past, people like Nietzsche and Schopenhauer. They were famous for taking these long walks where they could really think about and grapple with problems. And I think there's kind of a disconnect between a lot of intellectuals who they almost look down on people like you and I that are so big on health and fitness. They almost see it as like a lesser thing. And then you're seeing these new people like Jordan Peterson has got really healthy and he lost a bunch of weight and he feels so much better. He's realizing that, just like you said, there is a mind body connection, and you're not going to have your healthiest thoughts, and you're definitely not going to be your happiest self unless you're taking care of your vehicle, your body. And I really, that's one thing that I guess I got it from my dad, because he was big into just movement and exercise, and he still is today. He's 75. Just that idea of it, you have to build it into the fabric of your day in order to live your best life.
Well, so the one thing that we didn't hit on was mentors. So it seems like throughout your life, throughout your careers, you've had people to kind of help you along the way. Not kind of, to help you along the way. Whether that was when you were young and you were first starting MMA, when you went to derivative trading, when you dropped out and went back into MMA, and then when you got into real estate, you always had someone to guide you. Did you do those things on purpose? Did you surround yourself with those kinds of people on purpose? Or were you just lucky in finding them? Were you just in the right place at the right time?
I think it was a bit of both, but I think when I was a kid, I was a big reader. And so reading, you're getting access to mentors that you'll never meet in person. Maybe they've been dead 100 years, but in a way, you're still. I know you're a big reader too. You're getting knowledge and wisdom, and you're being much more efficient with your life by reading great books by great people. And it's the same, like you said, every career I've had. When I got into derivatives trading, there was an older guy at my company who we just kind of hit it off. He was from Eastern Europe originally. He was a refugee, and then he moved to Amsterdam, and they sent me to Amsterdam, and so we were both kind of not Dutch, but we were both living in Holland, and we just hit it off. And he was like a really, really good mentor to me. And he'd always complain about, I don't like the way we make all this money for the company and we get to keep just a fraction of it. And eventually I said to him, I said, listen, like if you want to, let's just start our own company. You'll be my mentor, but you don't really have that entrepreneurial spirit that I had. So together we're going to be a good match. So we set up our own trading company and we did very, very well. And that gave me the financial freedom to follow the martial art dream. So that was definitely, he was a huge mentor there. And then I think in martial arts, I've been so blessed, Jerry. I must have had over maybe in the 30 years I've been training, all the different styles of martial arts I've been training. I must have had 20 great instructors at least. And a lot of them were more than just teaching me, how to throw a kick or how to shoot a double leg takedown. They were much more like a lot of them were older and they kind of became father figures and kind of mentors in that way. And I feel like I got so much just life wisdom from them. And then in real estate, I got into real estate because my best friend was an attorney and he hated being an attorney. And he's like, I want to set up a real estate company. And we started working together. And he was doing real estate a few years before me. So he was my mentor from day one. So you're so right. I think it's really important to surround yourself at all times of your life with three different types of people in your life. You want to have the mentors. They're just people that are further along the path in whatever field of life you're interested in. And they can just help they can kind of shorten the path to success. So they're kind of older, wiser mentor figure. And then I think it's really important that you have peers that are kind of at your level that you can kind of, whether it's training partners, it will be a martial arts, or whether it's real estate people that are kind of the same, you can kind of pick each other's brains and you can inspire each other and you can compete against each other and have that kind of rivalry. And then I think it's really important as you get older. And you can't do this when you're starting out because you're just too focused on yourself. But I think as soon as you get a level of success, I think you kind of owe it to society and your small environment is to give back. And that's an old lesson in jiu-jitsu is I've been teaching since I was a purple belt. I've been teaching jiu-jitsu for close to 20 years now. And even though I've been learning the whole time, I've always been teaching a class a week or something like that, because they always say in jiu-jitsu, you owe it to the art to give back, to teach. And that's one of the reasons that you and I love podcasting is you get to meet people and hopefully, you and I can share some wisdom and we get to pick people's brains and not only educate ourselves, but also give back to whoever's listening or watching. So I think having all three is important. But that idea of mentors, I was listening to a podcast the other day and it was by a very, very successful, a guy worth 100 million entrepreneur. And he was saying he gets all these messages of like, people reaching out for help. And he's like, obviously he can't help everyone. But he said, if someone they come to you very sincerely and they have a little question and they're trying to ask your advice, he's like, don't ask someone to be your mentor. That's such a, if someone says to me, hey, can you be my mentor? Immediately I would be thinking, I mean, I've got a lot going on in life. Like, that's a huge commitment. Am I gonna have to spend 5 years with this guy? Do I have to break up with him? I don't even know him. What's he gonna be like? Is he gonna call me every? You have all these questions. But if someone comes to me genuinely and they just have a question about something, I'll always take the time to help them. And then over time, when you can see what's annoying is when people come to you, say you and I have done 100 podcasts, and someone says, "Hey, I want to know everything about podcasting. Jerry, spend an hour, tell me everything you've learned." But it's like, well, no, you've got to do a bit of work. But if someone says, hey, I'm starting a podcast, do you have a good editor or do you have a good hosting platform? If they come to you with specific questions and they're not trying to have you do their work, I feel like we'll always be really willing to help them. So I think that's the key is trying to find people that are further along in the path than you and but not expecting them to do all the work for you, putting some work in yourself and some research and then coming to them with specific things. And over time, hopefully you can kind of build those relationships where you can have a good mentor.
Yeah, I love that distinction, by the way. Not necessarily going to them to ask them to do the work for you. In my mind, I think tactics. You don't want to go to somebody and go, "Hey, tell me all the tactics. Tell me everything that you've done to get to where you are." What you're really trying to do is get deeper than that, because they can tell you all day long that I did this, even if they did sit down for an hour and said, "Hey, these are the 5 things that I did to get to where I am. And those are the things that work the best." Even if they told you those things, you wouldn't be able to do them
Yes.
because you don't understand, number one, all the steps that it took to get to that point. Number two, the mindset that it takes to be able to do that, which everybody overlooks, that you have to be a different person. Your mind has to be in a different place to be able to take certain steps and execute certain tactics, because there's certain levels of again, a different level of risk. Going back to risk, some of those things take higher levels of risk, which takes a different kind of mindset. So really, you don't necessarily use a mentor for that kind of thing. And especially if you go to one and you're like, hey, tell me what to do, a lot of them will do the same thing. They're like, yeah, whatever, guy. Like, here's a couple things. Now go away.
Yeah.
But you want to use a mentor to be able to get into their wisdom. You want to know it's just deeper than that. And until you
Mm.
understand that it's more about like understanding the mindset behind the journey than it is about all the things that it took to get there necessarily. Not that you want to learn those things, of course. I mean, that's just icing on the cake in my mind. But the wisdom behind it is the stuff that like that's the gold. And that distinction, just most people don't get a lot. But I think that to your point, whenever you're trying to help others at the same time, you know someone's serious when they're willing to just kind of come back from time to time and do the work. And you see, and they go away for a time and they come back and they're like, oh man, I tried all these things and these things work well, but I can't figure this one thing out. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, let's talk about that. Because then they're trying to understand what's going on instead of just like, just tell me what to do. Again, two very different things.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I want to talk about a couple the transitions that you have had, and I'm curious about your what was going on in your life during those transitions, just so we can get a feel. I'm always curious to know why kind of people do, make the changes that they do, and how things went about during that time. So, your first big transition was would you went from Amsterdam to, I think, New York. Maybe it was the first place in America you went to, and that's a huge transition. That is over a pond and a completely different environment. Many different things you had to deal with along that change. So, what was going on during that time, and what were some of the I imagine there were some mental obstacles you had to overcome during that time. Maybe not, but what were some of the things that you felt like you learned during that time?
So, Jared, I was so lucky because when I got I got this really good trading job in London, and they had offices. They had one in Amsterdam, like you said. They had New York and Chicago office, and I had a girlfriend at the time, but I was very much aware of the fact that as you get older and you get tied down, it becomes much harder to pick up and leave. And so for 2 years, I was a year in Holland in Amsterdam. Then they actually sent me to Chicago first for 6 months. Then they sent me to New York for 6 months, and then they asked if I would stay, and I asked to go back to Chicago, and I went back to Chicago. So I was pretty much living out of a suitcase, had almost nothing. And the hardest thing for me was just the logistics, because they would say, hey, we need it's a Saturday, and we're gonna get you a flight for Saturday night or Sunday, and we need you in the office on Monday. And here's $1,000. Figure out your accommodation. It's like, well, I've got no furniture. Just all the actual logistics I found pretty tricky because you don't really have anything. But it was such a great experience because when I graduated, there was two sides of my thought process. One of them was I'm a hard worker, so I can spend my whole life in a career. But before I start my career, I kind of want to just be a young, carefree person while I can. So I actually had this dream about I wanted to go to Australia or New Zealand, just spend a few years, literally just chasing girls and hanging out on the beach and just being a young man with no, carefree young man. And I got this opportunity at this trading company, and I was like, if I just work for a few, I saw these young guys making crazy money, and I thought, if I just work for a few years, then I can travel, but then I'm going to have money and experience. That makes a lot more sense. So I was very aware of the fact, even at a young age, that um, the fun and the travel will always be there. But if you get some skills and you get some money first, it's just going to be more fun. And I was very lucky that back then, I mean, you didn't have to be very bright to make money trading. You just had to be there on the trading floor, and these big orders would come in, and they would split it up among 30 guys in the trading pit, and everyone would make a huge amount of money with every trade. So it was a bit different over the 10 years I was trading. It became more and more sophisticated and harder to make money. But the actual, I think I had the mindset like, listen, I'll go to whichever office you want. I'll do whatever you want. I'll adapt because I'm young and I don't have any attachments. And so that made it much easier. And of course, I think the hardest thing is I'm a sociable person. So you spend a year in Holland. I developed some really close friendships with these people. I was working these long hours, sometimes 15-hour days. And then suddenly you pick up and leave and you go to an office in Chicago and I don't know anybody. And then you get very close friendships in Chicago after 6 months. And oh, now you're in the New York office. But the reason that I fell in love with Chicago is because Midwestern people are very, very nice. And I feel like the guys that I was working with, the young newer guys, Some of them are still dear friends to this day. I've been to all their weddings. It's just we very quickly became very close. And the hardest thing when you move country is you just, is that for me is that social network. So as soon as I got a social network through that, and then I found martial art gyms and I found like a social fabric there, that made it really easy. So I would say for anyone going through big changes like that, especially moving countries, is whatever passion you have. Maybe you're a runner. You know what? As soon as you move, go find a running group because it's going to give you structure, but it's gonna introduce you to like-minded people that have the same interests as you. So I was so lucky. I felt like all throughout all my moves, both the guys I work with, the company, a lot of them were kind of kindred spirits, young, driven people like me, but also through martial arts, I always found kindred spirits, training partners, and a lot of them became really, really good friends to this day.
Mm. So again, it feels like you were thinking through all of those steps. You said that, I knew that if I got some abilities, I got some skills, I got some money, then I would be able to, enjoy traveling a little more instead of just going and traveling and doing it for the sake of it or whatever. So did you develop that way of thinking through reading? You said you started reading at an early age. What were your parents like that? Did they kind of ingrain some sort of, hey, live freely and do what you want to do kind of attitude?
Think my parents were looking back, they were kind of a little bit hippies, a little bit like they raised us very much like my dad's got stories about like they were traveling somewhere and they're like, oh yeah, you and your brother were playing at some mall, this arcade game. So we just went to get dinner. And then when we came back, the mall was locked and we couldn't get you. You were locked in this mall. Like very different. You would never just leave your kids for 3 hours and go get dinner,
Yeah.
When we were, I don't know, we were like 6 and 8 or something, very young.
Okay.
So my parents were definitely hippies in that way. And then my dad's he was a pilot when I was growing up, so he was always traveling, and he would bring the kids and expose us to. I was very lucky that I got exposed to all these different people and ways of living and different cultures and countries, and so I think that definitely helped. But the reading thing is really interesting because I know you're a big reader as well, and we share that passion. And I think that's the now I'm a dad. I'm thinking about some of the real gifts of my life. And one of them that these things I want to share with my son, and hopefully if we have siblings for him one day. And one of them is going to be if you read a lot, you get a certain level of wisdom where you can just detect bullshit. So for instance, you and I we know the last 4 years all the lies of the media, the legacy media, and all that nonsense that we've all found out. It's all been proven to be lies. And for the longest time, you're a conspiracy theorist if you said it. I remember like really early on having a feeling like I just don't believe these people. And it wasn't just a feeling, it was a certainty. And I realized that I got that from years and years of just reading and thinking about a lot of things deeply. And I don't know how you can get that without spending time reading. And I think that's actually the biggest challenge. I think about you and I were similar in age, how lucky we were to grow up without a smartphone when we're 15, because I just think it's so hard for today's kids. And it's hard for me. Like I used to have this incredible focus, and now I have to, it's like a process, Jerry, like preparing for a workout. I have to be like, okay, I really want to read this book for 45 minutes. I don't want to be distracted. I got to get back to a couple of people. I got to send a few messages. Then I got to leave my phone in the furthest part of the house. So I'm not going to be tempted to get it. I'm going to go in this place. I'm going to tell my wife, please don't bother me. Look after my son. Because I really want to, it's like a whole process now. And I still I do it, but it's difficult. And so I can only imagine if I was a teenager, would I have the discipline to get away from these quick fixes, dopamine fixes from my phone? So I really do feel sorry for this generation now. I think it's such a difficult time to be alive. Because of that distraction. But I just think of all the gifts, like it's so interesting when you get to a certain age, you can kind of look back at your life and say, what are the key things? I think finding martial arts when I was 12 years old, just before I turned 13, and having parents that encourage reading, and I didn't have a TV in the house till I was a teenager. I think those two things were the biggest gifts that I had, and I really want to share those two gifts. And it's becoming harder and harder. And that's why I have a real kinship to you because I see, you read deeply, and I see you posting things from the books you're reading, and you're looking to improve yourself. And I think it's impossible if you just consume little short like articles online. You can get things from I subscribe to some newsletters that are good, but there's a different level of wisdom that comes from going deep into subjects. And I think the only way you can do that is with a 300-page book or something like that.
Well, true. And I think like, for instance, one of the authors that we talked about on your podcast was Ayn Rand. I know you've read Fountainhead, and I was talking about Atlas Shrugged, and I still haven't read Fountainhead, and I'm assuming you still haven't read Atlas Shrugged, but it is on my Amazon list, by the way, which your book is now officially in my cart, so I'm excited about that. But to go back to what we were talking about with the mentors, you don't go to a mentor and just ask for tactics. The same thing with things that you see on TikTok. Like, people are taking, first of all, nutrition advice from a 10-second video on TikTok. You can't understand why it's important for you to do that with a 10-second video on TikTok, even if it's useful. And I'm not saying that I would imagine 80% of what you find on TikTok as far as nutrition advice goes is questionable at best. But nonetheless, if it is even something that you should do, you can't understand why. For instance, I could walk up to anybody walking down the street and say, "Hey, what do you think a good diet looks like?" And they would tell me what a good diet looks like. And I would say, "Okay, are you doing that diet?" And they would say, "No. No, I'm not doing it." And if I asked them, they would say, well, there's got to be some other tactic, some other strategy. There's got to be some other thing that can help me do what I want to do." And that's basically what these little snippets of information are, right? It's just little snippets of information. It's high level stuff that you're never going to remember, that's never going to be useful because you don't gain the knowledge and understanding of why it's important. The wisdom,
Yeah, the
like you
context.
said. Yeah, you
Yes.
don't understand why it's so important. And you don't get that back end of why it means something and how you can interpret it yourself and so on. So I think there's something to be said about just being able to go deep into things. And I agree with you as far as, kids especially, but just people these days in general, not going deep on a whole lot of things. Everyone's too worried about staying on top of things. They're not worried about getting to the bottom of things and being
Mm.
able to go deep into things. So there's a lot to be said about that.
Well, if I can just talk about, so I have actually read Atlas Shrugged. I read it
Oh, you
after
have? I
after
did.
the
I didn't.
Fountainhead.
I
Yeah, I
thought you
had,
told me
I
that you
did.
didn't.
But I'll tell you, so the Fountainhead, it's a really great story. I was just before I left to set up my own trading company. I was working for this trading company, like I said, and I was making so much. I was in Chicago. I was just printing the money, and I was getting probably 5%, even less of what I made them, a tiny amount. And I realized that talking to the other guys, the local Chicago traders, they'd be like, yeah, I've got a 50-50 split with my backer. He backs me and we split the profits. And I'm thinking, wow, like they're getting like 10 times what I'm making for my split. I've got a terrible split. And so I'm 24 years old. Though. I'm still making a lot of money for a young man. And so I'm just trying to kind of figure out all these things. And then my boss, who was a horrible, horrible guy, he didn't like me. He made my life hell. But the one nice thing he did, he'd see me reading all the time. And one day he came in and he said, have you heard of Ayn Rand? Have you read The Fountainhead? And I said, I'd never even heard of it. I said, no. And then the next week he came in, he's like, here, he gave me a copy of The Fountainhead. So I read that and it convinced me to leave the company and start my own trading group. So, and looking back now at the arc of my life, that book has been not only the most influential book, but it's changed my life for the better. It enabled me to amass a lot of money in my 20s and then follow my dreams and make every mistake that you can make when you're wealthy and young. But the beautiful thing about that book is it impacted me so strongly, Jerry, that I must have given a dozen copies, maybe 20 copies to friends. I was always buying it to people and trying to share her knowledge. And I remember traveling with one of my best friends from England. We were in Thailand for 2 weeks, and he was like bitching the first 100 pages, like, it's kind of slow. And he's just like, oh, like, why do you recommend this? And then he got into it. And then he said it's one of the most powerful books he's ever read. He got so much inspiration because it's probably similar to Atlas Shrugged. She talks about these very strong characters, and the main protagonist of Atlas Shrugged is someone who he doesn't do what society and what other people expect of him. He does what's true to his heart and his nature, and I just found that so inspiring. It's the idea of being selfish to yourself, not in the sense of being a bad person. I think you should be a nice person, nice neighbor, nice friend, but being selfish with the direction you want your life to go. Don't do something because people expect it of you, because your mom told you to do it, because your friends think you should do this certain thing. Do something that if you know something in your heart is the direction you want your life to go, do it in that direction. And there's no way that I could have got that inspiration from an article online or a TikTok video, like you said. It was, I don't know how many hours it took me to read that book. 15, 20. It was like, 25. It was a long, it was a big time investment. And it was she's woven her philosophy into a long novel. And if Atlas Shrugged is even longer, and I think she wrote it after, and I actually preferred The Fountainhead because I think it was a bit, Atlas Shrugged kind of went on a little bit too long, I thought. But yeah, Atlas Shrugged, I mean, The Fountainhead, it starts off slow, and I don't know, it's probably 700 pages. But it's like if you invest that time, it could change your life. but you have to you have to have the discomfort of putting your phone in the other room, or saying no to a bunch of commitments and just sitting down for hours with yourself and your thoughts and a deep novel, a philosophical novel, and really going into it. And then it could change your life. And I think that's the hardest thing, is to try to explain to people, you've got these things that give you a quick hit of dopamine. They're easy. And you got these things that are difficult, but the difficult things is the way to a fulfilling life, in my opinion. Just like, do you want to skip today's workout, or do you want to do a leg day? Because we all know leg day sucks. It's like, well, if you do the leg day, it's gonna be much better for you in the long term. It's the same with so I always recommend it. It's just so difficult for people nowadays to read a big book. And listen, I'm going to say this, Jerry. I want to say a disclaimer, because a lot of people are like, oh, it's easy for you. You have all this discipline. With all the things going on in my life, and having a busy career right now, and having a toddler who's very needy, and a lovely wife who needs some attention too, I find it myself, I couldn't read The Fountainhead probably in my day-to-day in Chicago, but I could. That's one of the reasons I love to take vacation, is because I still work on vacation, but I work less. I just check in, and that's when I can get into a 600-page book. I find it very hard myself, even though I know all the benefits, to get into a deep book, because it's not a case of just sitting down for 45 minutes. It's like, if you try and meditate and you haven't just calmed down a bit, and you've got a million thoughts flying around your head, you have to get yourself into a mindset before you can even go into a deep book. You have to be willing to and open to really just going deep in a work with a calm mind, not a frantic mind. So I just want to say that disclaimer, that these things we're talking about, they're not easy, and they're not easy for me either. Because that's one of my big pet peeves, is when people say, oh, it's easy for you, Jerry, because you work out every day, but it's not easy for me. And it's like, well, you're not 20 years old. I'm sure you have days where you didn't sleep great, your lower back hurts, and your energy levels are low, but you have the discipline to get it done when you don't feel like it. And I think that's the difference between exceptional people and people that bitch and moan but don't get anywhere in life.
I can second that through and through. Number one, I'm going to go ahead and say that I'm going to order Fountainhead tonight, now that you've given me that dissertation, because I'm super excited about it. Since it's only 700 pages and not 1,000 pages like Atlas Shrugged, it should be an easy read. Excuse me. No, it took me. So the way that I read Atlas Shrugged, I'll read fiction books at night. And so I don't, sometimes I'll get a page in, sometimes I'll get 10 pages in, just depends on
Mm,
how awake I am. So it took me 4 months to read it, but but still, I can imagine sitting down and actually going through it. So that's another strategy you can do, is
mm.
like, pin your reading time at some point in the day when you don't have something else going on, right?
Yeah,
First thing in the
exactly.
morning, get up a little earlier and do some reading in the morning for even 10 minutes. If you get 3 pages in, great, that's 3 pages. Or like I said, whenever you're going to bed, if you're just sitting there, instead of sitting and watching TV, sit and read, and read whatever it ends up being. And that allows you to gain some perspective and be able to dive into something like that. But to go to the discipline part, I would totally second that. And the argument that it's easy for you, that argument in general is a non-argument in my mind,
Mm,
because it is not easy for me, just like it is not easy for you. It is a choice. Everyone at every second of every moment of every day is choosing to do something in that moment and ignoring a million other options. Everyone.
mm,
So you're always choosing what you're doing. The difference is, and this is why the idea of willpower and discipline can be so challenging, is really the difference is that one person's making a conscious decision while the other person is making an unconscious decision. That's not the only difference, but that's the major difference. Is the person who's like, "Hey, that's easy for you," is their life is full of unconscious decisions. And a lot of it is spent on the phone, a lot of it is spent on Netflix, a lot of it is spent in other, unconsciously getting up from the couch and walking to the cabinet and pulling out a bag of chips and sitting back down. Unconsciously doing it. So the reason that it's easy, no, the reason someone says something like that is because they have chosen to not live consciously, or up until that
mm.
point, they have chosen to not make conscious decisions.
Well, Jerry, can I just say on that point though, it's I just read a book. It was a biography, and I'm blanking on what it was, but it was some very successful person. It might have been Elon Musk biography, And I fall in this trap too. So that's why I like talking about this stuff. It's so easy to look at someone who's reached the pinnacle of success and think, oh, not that it's easy for them, but it must have been easier because they got there. And it's human nature to see the results of something that might have taken 2 decades of absolute complete dedication and just see the results. And even you and I, who are very intentional and we read a lot and we think a lot, it's hard for us to imagine 2 decades of complete sacrifice to get somewhere when we just see someone achieve the mountaintop or whatever it is, build a company, have a great sporting achievement, whatever it is. So that's one of the reasons I love reading biographies is you get reminded of all the struggles. And maybe you see someone have success in a company, but you have no idea that they had 3 startups that all failed and they went all in and they went into debt and they had all this stress to get to that fourth company that actually made it. And so I love those kind of reminders because it's easy for everyone. It's human nature when you see people. We live in a world where people tend to talk about the victories and not really talk about the defeats. And so I love reading about all the times that it took to get there. So for instance, I'm watching this great, I used to grow up watching Tour de France with my dad. He was a competitive cyclist. And there's a great documentary on Netflix called the Tour de France Unchained, I think it's called. And it's 2 seasons now, but the first season was about the 2022 Tour de France and all the different characters. Because I always thought it was just the winners that mattered, but there's like a guy that wins all the mountaintop races. He gets a different jersey. There's like the top young racer. He gets a special award, and there's even just winning a stage can be the difference between a great career in cycling or not. Like all the sponsorship. It's such a crazy big sport in Europe, and it was so cool because the first season there was this guy, they called him, his nickname was Disaster because he kept screwing up. And there was a guy where a guy won the stage, he was second and he's in the sprint and he's celebrating because he thinks he won. He doesn't even realize there was a guy ahead. And they're just like, this is so embarrassing. This guy was like a laughing stock. And I think he came top 3 like 5 times or something. But then the next year I think he won like 4 or 5 stages. So if he had stopped in that year, he would have been considered kind of an embarrassment, kind of a laughing stock, didn't really get there. But he just went on one more year. And that's one of them. I don't know if anyone wins more than 5 stages in Tour de France. So it's just, that's the difference between knowing a bit of having some perseverance and just recognizing. I love those kind of things because it reminds me like, hey, listen, like sometimes it's going to take a bunch of failures to get to that success. So I think I think these are such great things to talk about because I find it so inspiring because a lot of time failure is just the thing you need before you make the big success.
That's good. I love that story, by the way. Disaster. That's hilarious. So I want to hit on something real quick, and then I want to go to your next point or to your next jump, if you will, when you gave away your company, which I don't know. I'm curious how that played out. But at any rate, you said sacrifice, which is another word that I think scares a lot of people because they think the mindset is a sacrificial mindset. That's what a lot of people have. That I have to sacrifice, my chips. I have to sacrifice my alcohol. I have to sacrifice all these foods that I love, and I have to sacrifice, going out with friends if I'm gonna do this, if I want to lose weight or I want to get healthy, I have to sacrifice all of these things. But what you're essentially showing of yourself is your values. What you value is indulgence, and what you value is gluttony. If you're saying that you sacrifice these things, because really what you're doing is sacrificing your health. You're literally sacrificing life because at the end of your life, number one, you're taking time off of your life by living the way that you're living. So you're sacrificing life, your life, the one fucking life you literally have on this earth. You're sacrificing health span, meaning the amount of health that you have during your life. Most people's health span is up to about the age of 60, I believe, maybe 55 or 60, meaning you go up to that point before you start actually having, chronic diseases or significant problems with chronic diseases. I think it's maybe 50 or 55 at this point. So, whenever you say that I don't want to have to sacrifice things, you are immediately admitting your values. You value indulgence and gluttony over health, over things that will literally prolong your life and make your life better. And what you don't recognize is you are currently sacrificing. You're currently doing it, but what you value in life right now is is what you think you have to sacrifice to get this other thing.
Jerry, what a great reframe. And thank you for sharing that with me. That's one of the reasons I love talking to people like you, is because I have a bit of a sweet tooth and my diet's been a little off the last week or so. And you've just motivated me to make it better because what you said is spot on. It's not sacrifice. Everything in life is trade-offs. If I say yes to a busy social calendar, I'm saying no to time with my son and vice versa. We have to, everything in life, it's not a, there's no free lunch. Everything is a trade-off. And you gave the perfect example of a trade-off between indulging in your taste buds today and having a healthy tomorrow. And I'll give you a beautiful example. I put a picture on Instagram today that my mom sent me. It's of my dad in the Alps, in the south of France, hanging off a mountain at 75. And the only reason he can do that is because he spent a lifetime looking after his health. And now he gets to reap the rewards where a lot of his friends, if they're still alive, can barely do anything. And he's still so incredibly fit and healthy because he's made those sacrifices. I saw him. I grew up seeing him make those sacrifices. He's never touched a drop of alcohol. He's exercised pretty much every day of his life, and that's the reward you get. So thank you so much for sharing that reframe because it's 100% right. And it's a great reminder for me too.
That's pretty incredible, by the way. Yeah, I'm certain that most of his friends, they take pictures and celebrate when they get out of a chair on their own. So
Yeah.
the fact that he's climbing, rock climbing in the Alps is pretty amazing. That is incredible. So let's talk about your transition from your company to going pro in MMA, or shooting to go pro in MMA at 30 years old. I believe you were, which
Yes.
is
And
definitely a transition many people will not make at 30 years old, because sadly many people are like already settling into their career right around that age. So te- just talk to me about that time. That's pretty incredible.
Jerry, it was such a beautiful moment because I remember I had a really good friend on the trading floor, and he was a little bit older than me, and we'd have when it was slow, we'd go and get a late breakfast together. It was a cafe downstairs, and we were sitting there one day having breakfast, and I said, I'm doing pretty well, and I lived very humbly then. I was making all this money, and it was just accruing in my trading account. It wasn't like my standard of living was going up with my wealth. So I had all this money, and I realized like I have a lifetime. I could be 80 years old on a yacht in the south of France trading through a screen. Like I could trade forever, but I have a very small athletic window that's closing. I was just about to turn 30, where I can pursue. I was an amateur boxing champion. I was doing jiu-jitsu competitively. I think I was a blue belt, which is the first belt, but I was a pretty, solid grappler. And I was like, I've got this dream about putting it all together and seeing how far I can go as a professional fighter. And I think I've got to do it now. And he looked at me and he said, Lawrence, he's like, you will never, your life is amazing. Like you work for yourself, you have your own company, you're making all this money, you're chasing girls, you're carefree, enjoying life, and you're still doing amateur jiu-jitsu competitions, you're still boxing. So you're doing everything. Like, why would you give that up to go all in as a professional fighter when you don't have to? Like why would you'll never do that. And I'll never forget when he said that to me, I thought he has no idea who I am, because for me, my biggest fear was always being an old man with regrets. And I was like, man, if I keep going down this trajectory, I could just see myself being incredibly wealthy financially. But one day, hopefully, best case scenario, I have a family and I have kids, and then I have great grandkids, and I'm this old man with these great grandkids thinking, Jesus, like I had this dream that I knew about and I never did it. And everyone would look at me like you're a success, but I would know I'm a failure because I didn't act on my dreams. So it was such an easy decision. I remember one night I couldn't sleep, and I got up and I looked through all my accounts, and I was like, Jesus, I'm worth, a few million at the time. And I was like, I realized what made me happy. And it's like when I was making all that money, it wasn't like I bought a Ferrari, or I mean, I took a few nice vacations, but I didn't really, there was nothing material that I craved. Like I didn't want a huge house. I was single at the time, or like had a girlfriend. So I had like a nice, simple one-bedroom condo downtown Chicago. I was like, I don't need any more. But what I need is I need time, because I want to, if I looked at what I did on Saturday, instead of going to the gym once, I'd go to the gym 3 times. I would try to maximize the training time. So I thought that's my true passion. And I've got to take advantage. So what I should have done with the benefit of hindsight is I should have had an ownership. I should have kept my trading company and just stepped away and kept the company making money. but I was just like, my personality is I want to go all in, and the thought of fighting professionally was so hard and daunting. I was just like, I don't even want to think about finance, so I just gave my company away and started training 3 times a day, 6 days a week, and it was awesome. For 5 years, I lived the dream. I had 10 professional fights on the or nine, one amateur, nine pro, and on the amateur scene. Sorry, on the local, even in the top shows, you'll have fight cancellations a week out. Injuries, people get sick. There's all these different cancellations, and on the local professional scene, it's you're not getting paid much. So people sign up to fight you, and then they're not really training that much for a month, and then the fight's 2 weeks away, and they're like, oh, I'm not really in the best shape, and they just call the promoter and cancel the fight. I was cutting weight the day before I had a guy pull out. Like, so I probably trained for 20, 25 pro fights, but I only had nine, which was very frustrating. But during that period, I also competed a lot in jiu-jitsu. I ran ultramarathon. I did all this endurance stuff. I just really wanted to push my body as far as I could and just kind of see what I could accomplish. And by doing that, I also faced my fears because the idea of fighting in front of a big crowd, I'm naturally quite an introverted person. And I've worked really hard to push my extroverted side because for business, you want to be more extroverted. But it was always very difficult for me. So the thought of doing that, putting myself out there, the risk of physical injury, it was incredibly scary. And I knew that if I faced my fears for a few years and lived that lifestyle, I would gain so much out of it. And so while it cost me an insane amount of money, it's something that I'm just so happy I did because I'll know I'll never get that period back, and forever I'll be so grateful that I took those risks because I'll have those memories and those experiences that I'll have for the rest of my life.
That's beautiful. So the seasons, I think people underappreciate seasons of life. That
Yes.
you will there's always a season of life that will come and go, and once that season of life has gone, then there's little chance of you getting that back. It's not that you can't still be athletic. It's not that you can't still do things, but to maximize that potential is a much different idea.
That's so true. And that's actually a big thing where when I was young, I remember looking up to a few different people. So I know he's kind of, for a while, he was kind of shamed, Schwarzenegger, because he had the kid out of wedlock. And then he was saying, screw your freedoms. And everyone's like, what do you mean, screw your freedoms? If you were young when there was COVID shutdowns, you'll be the first person breaking into the gym. So that was a bit disappointing. But I was inspired by Arnold Schwarzenegger because you can look at his life. It's hard enough to reach one mountaintop, right? But you look at him, he had the mountaintop of being a very successful bodybuilder. Then people don't know this, but he actually made his first million through real estate development in Santa Monica, not before he ever made $1 million in a movie. So he was actually an entrepreneur, real estate entrepreneur, millionaire. Then he was obviously the most successful actor for a decade plus, and then he became a governor. So he had four. He reached four very different mountaintops in one life, which I think is so remarkable. How many people reach one? So I love that idea of having seasons in life and trying to achieve different things because I think there's a time and a place for everything, and I think there's nothing. I don't want to sound judgmental here, but I remember when I was young, I used to love going to nightclubs, and I wouldn't drink alcohol. I would just dance till 4 in the morning with my buddies. The dance clubs in London, and I remember every now and again you'll see a guy there with gray hair. He's 60 years old, and it's like, man, I always used to look at him and be like, that poor guy. Like he should have done this when he's younger. And listen, I've got a really good friend of mine who's 50 and he loves to go out. And I always laugh because he finally now has the money and he wasn't the most extroverted kid, and now suddenly he has money and confidence and he's trying to maximize his life, which I think is great. So I'm not judging anyone for it, but I just think if you can do things at the right time, there's definitely a time and place for everything. And I think when you're young, every person should be kind of focusing on um figuring out what they want in life. So I think the best advice for a young person is try to read widely about different things and just gain perspectives. And then through that, you're going to figure out, okay, I want my life to go in a certain direction. And earlier you mentioned the one word we didn't talk about was purpose. And I think it's very hard for a young person, Jerry. Like, how do you know what your purpose is when you don't know anything about life? So I think you have to do a bunch of crappy jobs when you're young, and you have to read a bunch of books, and you have to talk to interesting people and try and be exposed to different things. And then through that, you can figure out what is my purpose. And I think that's such an interesting. I'd love actually to ask you about what you think your purpose is. But I think talking about seasons of life, I think your purpose changes. I think the purpose, myself as a young person, the purpose of 20-year-old or 25-year-old me was to try and be financially independent, be able to pay my bills and support myself. And then the purpose of me at 30 was to completely be selfish and follow my dreams, not in a bad way, but just do the things that I want to do while I could. And then the purpose when I changed careers back into real estate in my mid 30s was to kind of get myself back into a solid financial footing, find something a bit more stable that I enjoyed doing, that utilized my signature strengths. My purpose today, my number one purpose, is to be a great husband and father. So it's like your purpose will change, but how do you even know what your purpose is when you're young? You have to kind of live a bit of life. So I'd love for you actually to talk a little bit about how you see your purpose and how that's changed.
Definitely. But I'll second everything that you just said. Certainly, it's the same idea. Like, just to tell a teenager that your purpose is to go out and, live a career and get into your career would be insane. You have to be able to, you have to understand that, you different parts of your life are going to be different. It's not all or nothing right now. It's even when you start something today, you're not going to continue doing this forever. For instance, I just closed a gym last year, which I had for a decade. It was in my life for
Yes.
10 years. That's a long time. So that's challenging to let go of for sure, but it didn't feel like the right thing to do to keep moving forward. It didn't feel like what was going to take me to my next purpose in life, or to fulfill what I believe is the overarching purpose that I want to be able to fulfill, which really comes down to just being able to help as many people live a more conscious life. Comes down to being able to help people live consciously and to live to their fullest potential, is what the overarching purpose kind of comes down to. For that 10 years, it was to help people get healthy and fit. That's what it was for that 10 years. And it's not that I don't still want to help people get healthy and fit, but now it's just more encompassing, because I
Yes.
realize that, you can be healthy and fit and still be sad and unhappy and unfulfilled and all of that thing. And it's not that, again, even if you do get healthy, fit, and you find happiness in life and you do all these other things, that you're not going to have times where you're still unhappy and you still feel disgruntled and so on and so forth, because you don't all of a sudden have it and now it's there all the time. But if you understand that you can build the mentality and build yourself to a level of consciousness that allows you to work through those times instead of always hang on to those times. I, you know, I feel sad, I feel unhappy. A lot of people hang on to that, and really they continue, their sadness become continuous because they've just hung on to it.
Mm.
They feel it as a feeling, and they're like, oh, I guess I'm just sad and unhappy in life, and that's just the way that it is. Instead of having the level of consciousness to be able to actually work through it, to actually go, why am I feeling this right now? Is it just some offhanded thing? Or is there actually something in my life that is making me feel a little unhappy? So I would say that that's where I feel my ultimate purpose is right now. Not having, when I get married again, another thing that was in my life for 10 years before this was I was married for 10 years, which was also um, part of that purpose as well. But us having different visions about what long-term life looked like made it hard for us to live congruently. Certainly a challenge, but when I get married again and when I have children down the road, I know that that'll be my main purpose. That then um, can be built into that purpose of helping a broad set of people live consciously.
And Jerry, I love the fact that you said you realized that you'd kind of had a decade of owning a gym, and that was kind of that chapter had closed, because a lot of people, when they get to those kind of big moments in life, they would think, well, I've invested 10 years in this, it's how I pay the bills, I've got to keep it going. And I think that it takes so much courage to say, this has been great, but it's time to move on. Just like with a relationship, you have such a mature approach to dating, which is so refreshing, because there's so many people that they want the world, but they don't even think about what they're going to contribute. And I think you had something, when we were talking before, you actually gave me some really good wisdom on relationship advice, which was very unexpected. I wasn't expecting that. But
Unexpected for me
to
too.
have but Jerry, just to have the confidence to say, it's been great, but we're not compatible, or it's been a great part of my life, but it's time for me to move on. I think that's a really healthy life, because too many people get caught in a routine. Like the sadness was a great example. Instead of just saying, the sadness is telling me that I have to make some changes, they'll say, they'll change it to become, I'm a sad person, and then it'll stay with them. And so I think it takes a lot of courage to say that and to recognize that. And it's something as I get older that I really want to spread the message is we have that feeling, that gut feeling we talk about. And it takes a lot of confidence to listen to your gut and know when something has reached its natural end or something isn't right. And it's so easy for our rational side to overcome our gut feeling. But I don't think I remember someone saying, Lawrence, has there ever been a time where your gut has been wrong and your rational mind has overridden it and been right? And I said, no, it's always the other way around. So that's a great thing I want to spread too, is try to listen. We all have those innate thoughts of this isn't the direction I want my life, or this will be an incredible dream. And if I don't do it now, my future self's going to be, I'll always regret it. Try to think about those things when you're coming to these big pivotal decisions in your life. And I very rarely doubt you'll steer you wrong.
Yeah, it's very true. First of all, I appreciate, all the kind words that you said, but definitely it takes, I mean, at the end of the day, you just have to I, look at the future and look at the past and ask yourself if the future looks, if you believe that the next 10 years is going to improve in any way, shape, or form, if things keep going the same way. With the business,
Mhm.
that's what I did. I didn't even look 10 years. I don't, you look 5 years down the road. And is the business going to help me fulfill what I believe is my next mountain or my next purpose in 5 years? Based on the last 10 years? And the answer was no. I mean, and
Mhm.
and again, it's not an easy choice, and it's certainly not an easy task to go through closing a business or getting a divorce. Both those things very challenging, especially after 10 years for both of them. So there you have to be prepared for the downtime, for the retraction time, if you will, because when you make that decision, you're going to go immediately into contraction. You're not going to go into expansion like you might think that you will. And there were some times in my mind where I'm like, well, if I move on from this business and I get online and I start doing things, then I'll be able to get there pretty quick. Damned if it did not. It's not pretty quick. It's only been 9 months at this point. So it's still a short period of time considering everything. But I definitely feel better about things now than I did even just 2 or 3 months ago. But the point is, people are scared of that contraction part. They're scared of letting
Mhm.
go and then moving into contraction. But if you recognize that part of the, it's just part of what happens. And the more conscious you are during that process, and the more you make, you know, use your rational mind to feel what you're feeling and to work through it, then you can actually work through it more effectively. And don't
Mhm.
be scared. Don't be scared of that contraction because it's part of life anyway. Expansions and
Exactly.
contractions.
And just changes too, Jerry. I'll say this, like, I to go from the image of a professional fighter to now being a dad. Yeah, of course, this I'm still the same person, but it's a very different image. Me hanging out with my son as opposed to me, training 3 times a day, getting ready for war. It's a very different, different. Too many people get attached to a certain image and they find it very hard to let go. But you're not going to find the new you unless you give up the old you. Just like if you're out of shape and overweight, you have to jettison that image and start thinking as a fit person who's fit and healthy you're going to be. And then over time, the habits will catch up to the image. So I think just letting go of things and being open to new things is very important.
No doubt, my friend. Lawrence, we've been at it for almost an hour and 10 minutes, and I feel like we could go for another hour. So we're going to go ahead and cut it off for now. And I'm going to assume that we're going to do this again because I feel like we could just go back and forth ongoing, really. um, Brother, I appreciate you so much. I appreciate your wisdom. I appreciate your insights more than you know. Um, where can people find you?
Thank you, Jerry. And likewise, I got a really good friend. He always says, Lawrence, the world is a mirror. So I appreciate you too. And you've inspired me to be a bit cleaner with my diet because I fell off the wagon a bit, Jerry. I gotta be honest. But yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. Lawrence Dunning on LinkedIn and Lawrence Dunning on Instagram. And yeah, it's a pleasure. We'll have to do another one soon. And I think you and I, it's really cool when you meet people that just see the world the same way and they're very much trying to invest in themselves and grow and be the best person and I feel like you and I both share a lot of those common traits. So kudos to what you're doing. You're putting a lot of positive energy out in the world, and I always find that so inspiring. And I love what you said about your mission about helping people because there's times in my life where I've definitely been a bit more on the I've got to invest in me before I can help other people. And you've been helping people for a long time be their best selves. So I find that very inspiring. And ultimately, the older I get, the more that I do want to give back, because being selfish doesn't make you happy. It's about, giving back and improving the people around you. So thank you for sharing that message, because that's inspired me.
I appreciate that so much, brother. Thanks, Lawrence. Appreciate your time, man.